Now, the Qatar-based news channel Al Jazeera has dismissed demands from neighbouring Gulf countries and their allies that it be taken off the air. They say it's an attempt to suppress free expression. Well, earlier on this month, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain all severed ties with Qatar and restricted access to land, sea and air routes, accusing the country of funding terrorism. That's an accusation which Doha rejects. Well, Qatar shares its only land border with Saudi Arabia, and this isolation has left the country of 2 million under a de facto blockade, which won't be lifted unless Qatar meets a list of 13 demands within the next 10 days. Amongst the demands, the closure of Al Jazeera. Well, that channel was launched in 1996, and it has become one of the Middle East's most powerful media outlets. Well, for more, we can speak now to former Al Jazeera Bureau Chief Mohamed Fahmy, who joins us live from Washington. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome back to France 24. Now, it was the news channel's alleged links to the Muslim Brotherhood which angered the Egyptian authorities, resulted in you spending 438 days at a maximum security prison. Are you surprised that this demand is being made of Qatar to shut down Al Jazeera?
I'm not surprised at all, because this demand has been brought to the table during the first Riyadh agreement in 2013 in November, when the same Gulf states asked and demanded as well that Qatar reviews its hypercritical rhetoric and critical programming of the Gulf states and Egypt, and to stop hosting Muslim Brotherhood leaders and to stop supporting terrorist groups. But even though the Qatari Emir signed on the agreement, he broke his promise, and that led to the withdrawal of the ambassadors of these states from Qatar, and a huge rift that ended in 2014 with the closure of Al Jazeera Mubashir, the Egypt affiliate to Al Jazeera Media Network. So what's happening today is these are crippling demands, and I don't think Qatar will be able to meet them. However, I believe that this will lead to more economic sanctions, according to many of the former diplomats and some of the officials and researchers I'm meeting here in Washington.
Yeah, I mean, many people would say that it's Saudi Arabia is also perhaps the home or the breeding ground of extremist ideology, and that perhaps this is a question of the pot calling the kettle black. What are your thoughts?
There's no comparison in any way. There are tens and of scores of Qataris that are designated as terrorists by the US and the UN, who have been funding groups like Al-Nusra Front and ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood for years, who are now walking freely in Qatar, and the country there has been given so many chances. They have also an office for the Taliban. They allow Hamas leaders to live freely and operate from there, and they also host fugitives from these Gulf states and from Egypt. Yesterday I held a press conference in Washington, D.C., and I announced the developments in a lawsuit that I brought against Al Jazeera in Canada, and my former colleague also spoke about his lawsuit in Washington, D.C., which includes the fact that Al Jazeera dealt unethically and illegally with Muslim Brotherhood group designated as a terrorist while I was working in the Marriott very professionally, which made my situation even worse in the Egyptian court. We also realized through the research that they didn't have the proper licenses. That also made our situation much worse in the court.
Just looking at the timing of all of this, would you say that there's any connection whatsoever between this sudden isolation of Qatar and the recent visit to Saudi Arabia by the US president? Do you read anything into that?
Well, you know, Mr. Trump said that Qatar is a state that sponsors terrorism at a very high level. I think the discussions, and he said it as well, started in Saudi Arabia, and it seems that Qatar remained stubborn. They did not comply with any of these requests that are usually held in secret meetings, but now everything is in the open, and there's many evidence that surfaced recently. There was in Bahrain TV, a phone call was leaked that shows Hamad Al-Atiyah, the Qatari Emir's advisor, conspiring with a Bahraini man considered as a terrorist, and telling him, we will put all your protests and on our TV in Al Jazeera right now and immediately, and I will send you someone, an alias from Al Jazeera, to communicate with you and gather this information. So it seems like the Qatari palace is the executive producer of Al Jazeera channel, and these are just examples that are very minimal to what is really happening. And I think the network should begin reviewing their motto, the opinion and the other opinion, by at least allowing Qatari opposition members to appear on their channels and talk about the fact that there is no political parties in Qatar, no labor unions, no press freedom.
And just lastly, how do you see events panning out? Do you see this perhaps even escalating to an armed conflict, or not to that degree?
I do worry about that, specifically because of the presence of Turkish military on the ground in Qatar. And the relationship between Iran and Qatar is also troubling for the region, specifically because of all these proxy wars that are happening around the area in Yemen, in Libya, and so on. So I do worry that this could escalate to a military confrontation, and that would be the worst for the region that is already, grappling with moving forward with the political turmoil. But Al Jazeera is a big problem at the moment because they're criticizing all their neighbors, but they're not criticizing their backyard, and that angers a lot of these leaders. And they allow somebody like Yusuf al-Qaradawi to appear on Al Jazeera Arabic. He has 60 million viewers. He has an Arabic channel, and he endorses suicide bombings, and that is one of the main issues. Freedom of expression is one thing we all respect, but if you're insightful and you're poisoning the minds of the youth, and with all the terrorism that we're seeing around, that is a big problem.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Former Al Jazeera Bureau Chief and journalist Mohamed Fahmy in Washington. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.